Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this very, actually, pretty special day. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank our Director of Public Works, Ed Gentile, and Darren. Where is he? Darren Ostenfein, for working on this project. And we are being taped, so you will be able to take a look at this anytime in the future if you have any questions or you want to just brush up on something. And I think for purposes of this meeting, if you have, when we come to the questions and answers, if you come to the microphone, it's just easier for the camera, for the audience when we're replaying. Okay? So thank you, and here's Ed.
Thank you very much. Ed Gentile, Director of Public Works for the town of Darien. Just a quick introduction. We met Darren, so the Assistant Director of Public Works, but also from Ty and Bond, Joe Canis will be here. He'll be taking us through the presentation. So let's just a quick recap before I hand it over to Joe. Why are we here tonight to do, what's the meeting for? So we're here to present the study, the drainage study for the area of Tilly Pond and Grove Street. And just talk about this study's particular, spend time on this one in particular. There are other studies that were commissioned by the town and they have been completed, and we've met with the public already on those studies in particular. At the end, the consultants, at the end of his presentation, there'll be time set aside for questions from the public, or you folks can get up and ask us anything you'd like, and we'll do our best to answer them. So why this area? Why did we study this area? Well, Tilly and Grove was not shown on the FEMA's 100-year flood zone areas. So we tried to target those with our studies, this one in particular, because it was not included in there. So in 2021, when it flooded significantly, it was added to the list of with a couple of locations here in Darien that we would take a look at with a consultant going back and performing a study. So it did take us a little bit of time to get this study going, to get it finalized. It did seem to be that it would be a straightforward analysis for us to do. It turned into a study that required more thought regarding the impacts of future flooding and the increase in intensity and frequency of these storms that we're getting now. In addition, we did receive some good questions and comments from the area stakeholders, which kind of pushed us in a little bit of a different direction, that we wanted to make sure we included those comments and questions in our study. We will talk a little bit more about that tonight on some of those areas. We feel comfortable now that we have a better understanding of the drainage area in the system from Tilly through Grove, down Corbin, if you will, and then out to the Goodwives River. Any of the next steps that we do take with the study and the analysis, of course, we will include the stakeholders and the property owners down there that have an abundance of knowledge of what's going on in the past, and we'll draw from that knowledge to make sure that we have a design going forward that is complete. So the presentation is, I'm not going to say it's long, but it does take a little bit of time, if you will. It is detailed and informative, so please be patient. Hold your questions until the end, where we'll open it up to the public. In addition, the video of the presentation will be posted on channel 79, as well as the PowerPoint presentation that will be posted on the town website under the Public Works section. So I will turn it over to Mr. Joe Canis from Ty and Bond.
All right, thanks, Ed. My name is Joe Canis. I'm a professional engineer with Ty and Bond out of our Shelton, Connecticut office, and I'll walk you through tonight's presentation. So tonight's presentation will be about 45 minutes long. We'll start with a discussion of the evaluation process, the area that we studied, some of the observations that we made during our data collection phase, an overview of the existing drainage system in the Grove-Tilly area, the hydraulic modeling that we did to analyze the storm drainage system that's currently in place, some considerations that we made with climate change, and then finally our recommendations. We looked at 8 different alternatives, and then as Ed said, we'd wrap up with the questions and answers. So the evaluation process starts with data gathering and site observations, right? And some of that data that we get is mapping. We look at what the underlying soils are in the area, And then we also talked to the Department of Public Works about some of their flooding observations, as well as some of the stakeholders. Then we gather all that information, then we do a desktop review, we organize it, and try to make some early inferences as to where what areas we should target during our study. Then we actually perform the flooding evaluation. This is where we do the hydraulic modeling. And based on that, once we have a functioning model, we can then develop our recommendations for mitigation. So the study area is outlined here in the magenta color. North is to the left. So let me, here we go. All right, so you can see this is the Grove-Tilly area down in here. We have Interstate 95 here, railroads up here. So the watershed extends a fairly significant distance upstream. It extends as far as St. Nicholas Road, which is over in here. And this area is determined by what contributes to the Goodwives River at Old Kings Highway South. The study area itself, everything within that magenta line, it's a total of 461 acres is within that study area. Like I said, it extends north to St. Nicholas Road. And then it includes all the downtown area, most of it I should say, that lies between the railroad and Interstate 95. So this area here, and obviously downtown also extends on the other side, but that's a different watershed. So the data gathering consists of, it's like putting pieces of a puzzle together. So some of the things that we look at are the storm sewer maps, right? The storm sewer mapping tells us how the drains are interconnected, the sizes of the drains. We also look at the flood insurance study that FEMA publishes because that indicates areas that are susceptible to riverine flooding. We also look at high water marks to help calibrate the model to ensure that we can replicate a past storm event. We also take a look at rain gauge data to better understand, during the calibration process, how much rain has fallen, so what kind of storm was it? Was it a 25-year? Was it a 50-year storm? Was it something else? We look at the underlying soils. If you have a loose, gravelly soil, you're going to get a lot more infiltration and less runoff than you would if you have a tight, silty soil. We also look at photos of flooding, right? That helps us place where some of those high water marks are. There's also field observations when we go out in the field, things that we look at. This also includes videotaping of some of the existing storm drainage lines out there. Tidal gauge data, not necessarily in this case, but we do need to take a look at the tailwater of the Goodwives River because the system eventually drains to the Goodwives River, so we need to understand what that relationship between the tailwater, how high the Goodwives River gets, and the Grove-Tilly drainage system. And then finally, we also look at historic mapping to really see, take a look back in time, and this also includes aerial photographs from the past, from the 1930s. So some of the rain gauge data that we looked at, you can see here, we primarily focused on two storms. One was July 9th, 2021. That was Hurricane Elsa. That was ended up being a 50-year storm event, which dropped 5 inches of rain in over 6 hours. The other one that we looked at was the September 1st to 2nd, 2021 rainfall event that was associated with Hurricane Ida. That was a much larger storm event. That was about 7.1 inches of rain over a 7-hour period. And one of the things to clarify is you'll often hear terms of 100-year storm, 50-year storm. That doesn't mean if you have a 100-year storm, you're good for the next 100 years. It's more of it's more based on probability. So what FEMA has done and other agencies are starting to do is express it in terms of percent chance of occurring in a given year. And a 50-year has a 2% annual chance of occurring within a given year, whereas a 250-year storm event has a 0.4 annual chance of occurring within a given year. So what we did was, to get this information, as you can see, we consulted various rainfall gauges from different sources. And what we did was we discarded the ones that just didn't seem to make sense. Like, for example, you have 5 inches here, 4.2 inches here, but you only have 1.5 inches there. Something tells me that, that gauge, there might have been some issue with it. So we discarded the highs and the lows. And then what we did was we compared the rainfall gauge data to NOAA Atlas 14, which is a current standard that determines what storm event corresponds to what frequency of precipitation. And typically those are expressed in 24-hour duration, so we did have to convert from one to the other. But basically, for comparison, in a 24-hour duration, 50-year is 7.4 inches of rain in that 24-hour period, whereas the 100 is 8.32 inches of rain in that same 24-hour period. So that just gives you a flavor of, if it's expanded over a full day. And then, again, for further reference, 200-year is 9.4 inches in 24 hours. So some of the available mapping that we look at include flood maps. The flood maps show riverine and coastal flood risk. We also take a look at soils mapping. Like I said, the more porous the soil, the less runoff you're going to have because that soil soaks up the rainfall, whereas if it's tighter, it's silty, it's clay, it's not going to absorb as much runoff, so you're going to get more, you get more runoff. We also have historic mapping. We look at USGS mapping, and we show, those tend to show where development patterns over time. They go back to 1893. So you can see how things have evolved. You can see how watercourses were relocated or filled in. And that all, like I said, and then we also have topographic mapping. That's watershed scale mapping, like the town's contour mapping. That helps us define what those limits of our study are. What the watershed is. We also have storm drainage system maps that DPW has that identify how pipes are connected together, how the storm drainage network is built out. So those are the types of mapping that we factor into our analysis. One of the things that Ed had pointed out in his introduction is that the Grove-Tilley area is not mapped as a area of a special flood hazard, right? This is a section of the flood insurance rate map, and you can see here in blue is basically the 100-year floodplain. The areas in orange are the 0.2% or 500-year floodplain. And you'll see this, the primary study area, which West Avenue is up here, north is to the top. Railroad is here, Post Road is over here, and Grove and Tilley is over in this area, is that there are no special flood hazard areas, right? So according to the FEMA map, this doesn't flood, but obviously you all know that's not true. There is flooding there. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, it's also important to mention that FEMA's mapping doesn't represent future risk. It doesn't even represent current risk. It represents the risk at the time the map was generated. So in this case, it's 2013. And it also only shows riverine or coastal flooding. It doesn't show urban flooding. And when I say urban flooding, that really means drainage from your storm sewer systems. It doesn't map that type of flooding. And another important thing to keep in mind is that 30% of all flood risk claims are within these low risk areas, so areas that aren't even mapped as being within a floodplain. Just a little tidbit. We talked about USGS topographic mapping. I said it goes back to 1893. I was wrong, it actually goes back to 1892. And this blue marker shows the project location, the Grove-Tilley area. And you can see that there's a watercourse that comes down and joins the Goodwives River further to the south, just to the east of the site. And you'll see by 1943, a couple changes have happened. Right? Again, here's our project area. Obviously, it's more built out. But you can see here is Tilley Pond. And the drainage looks like it's culverted, right? You don't see that stream coming down from Tilley Pond, the Tilley Pond area, and joining the Goodwives River. And then by 1951, you can see there's a lot more development. You still see Tilley Pond up here, Bailey's over here. You can actually see the Post Road here. But again, you don't see that watercourse that comes down. So that leads us to believe sometime between 1892 and 1943, Tilley Pond was created, and the discharge from Tilley Pond was piped to the south to the Goodwives River. And then what we also look at is some of the aerial photos. This is an aerial photo from 1934. It's the earliest available from the state archives. And you'll see a couple of features here. One is Tilley Pond, which is right there. The second is there's a watercourse, right? There's a short section of watercourse that comes out from beneath the railroad. West Avenue is over here, and you'll see it comes through here. And then number 3 is actually the Grove Brook Street intersection. And then you can see also that this dotted line represents the watercourse. It does come a little bit further down. So it looks like, maybe that culverting happened sometime between 1934 and the 1940s. And so now take a step ahead at about 31 years. It's 1965. And again, you see here, number 1, that's Tilly Pond. You can see the West Avenue parking lot is here. We got the railroad. We still have that short section of watercourse. And then it disappears, so it's culverted, and a little bit more filling down in here. So 1 is Tilly Pond, 2 is the watercourse, and then 3 is the Grove and the Brook Street area. So the other thing we looked at, we actually sent engineers out in the field to do some field observations. And what that is, we have the mapping, but there's always some data gaps that need to be filled in by looking in the field to really see what's going on. And some of that includes identifying some structures that might be missing from the mapping, or opening certain structures to confirm connections and pipe sizes, just to see how things are really connected together if there's a question. And also, in some cases, if it's not clear which way things are flowing, we'll measure down from the top of the manhole down to the bottom of the pipe. At a couple locations, get a sense for how things flow. And then also, you'll see here in the upper right, we did some pipe video inspection as well. That didn't turn up anything that was unusual. There weren't any weird blockages or anything like that. So the existing drainage system, I apologize, the background doesn't really show up that well, but don't worry, everybody, north is to the top. Post Road cuts across here. 95's down here. Goodwives River is down here. West Avenue's up here, and Tilly Pond's here. So what we did was we mapped the trunk line. We didn't map out all the little branches and things like that. We were really interested in the mainline drainage. And you can see here we've color-coded it. So it leaves Tilly Pond as a 24 by 36 inch elliptical pipe, so oval cross section. Transitions to a twin 24 inch pipe. Makes its way through the lot, and then comes into the railroad as a 34 by 53 elliptical pipe. That's 34 inches high, 53 inches wide. And then once it's south of the railroad, it discharges into a short stretch of open channel. I should also point out there is a short stretch of open channel on the north side of the railroad crossing as well. That is then piped here as a 34 by 53 elliptical pipe, opens up into an open channel, and then once it gets out near Grove Street, it's piped first as a box culvert, that's 2 feet high by 5 feet wide, and then again down Grove Street as an elliptical pipe, crosses the Post Road, and then continues making its way towards Goodwives River, enlarging to a 73 by 44 inch arch pipe, then a 2 by 6 box, and then finally twin 29 by 45 inch elliptical pipes. So it's definitely a interesting collection of different pipe sizes that in general increase as you move from upstream to downstream. So there is increased capacity. So based on this information, we have an idea of how the pipe system is connected. We know the directions things flow. So we can start to build the model. And what goes into that is the information on the drainage system. We look at the watersheds contributing to various parts of the system. We don't look at the thing as one big lump sum. We actually break it up into little pieces and then combine them. We start to build out our hydraulic model. Then we calibrate it to known storm events, just to make sure that it reflects those 2 storm events that we discussed. Then we document what the existing flooding areas and the potential causes are. And then using that existing conditions model, we then build on that and make modifications to represent some potential improvements. You know, maybe we swap out a pipe size, we redirect a pipe elsewhere. So that's the kind of thing that we do. And so what we did was we divided the study area into different watersheds, right? You'll see those outlined here in the different areas of yellow, right? Just to get a better idea, you have branches that come into the mainline system. Really, that way, if you can, you know, see something changes along the mainline system, you can go back and isolate it to one of these particular smaller subwatersheds. So it was divided into 17 subwatershed areas. And again, like I said, we use that to help isolate where certain problems might be. And it really helps to narrow down where potential problem areas are. And some of the things that we look at when we look at these watershed areas are the amount of impervious cover. For example, you know, the more pavement that you have, the more runoff that you have. So that's something that we look at. We also look at how much what the land cover is, what's forested versus lawn, because those have different runoff characteristics. We also look, like I said, at the underlying soil types, right? Is it porous? Is it like a tight, silty soil? All that influences how much runoff you're going to get in a particular area. And then we look at what's called the time of concentration, which is basically how long it takes for that entire subwatershed area to start contributing flow to the lowest point in that subwatershed. And that's based on a couple things. Slope, the steeper something is, the more quickly the runoff is going to get there. The land cover, if it's flowing across pavement, it's going to move more quickly as opposed to flowing across a forest floor, for example. So, okay, so we're good there. Just to clarify, when I say hydraulic model, it's a computerized model. That's based upon you know, different equations and methodologies that have been developed by the Army Corps of Engineers. So it's not like we're not gluing things together. It's all electronic. And so in calibrating results, right, we check against known rainfall measurements, observed high water marks. You see how high things got, how wide the flood was. We also, one of the things we take a look at is the tailwater elevation, right? To take a look at, you know, what the potential condition of the Goodwives River would have been at that particular point in time. We also take a look at something called antecedent moisture conditions. And what that is, it's basically how much rain has fallen in the past week to 10 days. Because if soil is super saturated, like it has been raining in the past couple days here, that means the soil isn't absorbing as much runoff as it would under normal conditions. The flip side of that, if you have a summer like you did maybe a year or two ago where it was super dry, your soils are going to absorb more runoff than typical, right? So that's something we take a look at, and we adjust our runoff coefficients during the calibration process to match what the antecedent moisture conditions were during a storm event. And then we take a look at, well, how well do the results align? You know, are we comfortable with, you know, the depth and the extent of flooding that we're getting under our existing conditions? And then can we move on to the next step and start making some recommendations? So the model results, what we're looking at here are the first step in our existing conditions analysis. Right, we got Boston Post Road here, Metro North Railroad is here, Tilly Pond is up here. So this is for a 2-year storm, which has a 50% chance of occurring in any given year, which is equivalent to 3.5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And what I did was I tried to color code these. You'll see as we go through the slides. For flood depths that are 0 to 6 inches, I consider that like a low to moderate condition because you can still drive a car through that. If it's 6 to 12, that's more severe, right? You can't really drive a car. You might be able to get an emergency vehicle through that. But, you know, if it's 12 inches or more, that's essentially impassable, right? You're not going to be able to get through that. So existing conditions, right, for a 2-year storm, we showed about 1 inch of flooding coming across Tilly Pond here, and then 3 inches on the south side of the railroad. The next one is a 5-year storm that has a 20% chance of occurring in any given year. That's 4.55 inches of rainfall in the 24-hour period. And you can see, we start to see more flooding here at Tilly Pond. Here south of the road, we start to see it at Grove and Brook Street. And then we also, you can see we're starting to get at a 10-year level, which is 10% chance, 5.38 inches of rain, right? We're starting to see much greater depths of flooding coming across Tilly Pond here. And then 25-year, it's a 4% annual chance, 6.54 inches. You can see how, it's just keeps on growing as we go through the 50, and then the 100-year. So 100 years, 8.32 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, and you can see that there's quite a bit of water out there. So some of the key takeaways, looking at the existing drainage system. The system can overtop at a 2-year event. The town's typical design standard is a 25-year, and with 50-year design for low points and culverts. There are multiple choke points in the system, right? There's some inconsistent pipe sizes. You could see, there's a lot of hydraulic loss by going from open channel to pipe to open channel to pipe back to open channel again. The other thing that's a challenge is increasing precipitation depth and frequency, right? We're starting to see more severe storms. We're starting to see greater precipitation depths. And general storms are becoming more intense. But there's also some opportunities for improvement, right? But through our investigation, we found some ways to make the system more efficient, to reduce those flood depths and conform to the current town drainage requirements. And looking here, you can see annual rainfall has been trending upward. I believe this is at Bridgeport, 125 years of record, plus or minus. You can see, up and down, but you'll see the general trend has been upward in terms of annual rainfall. The other thing that we're seeing, too, is the intensity of the storms, right? These are days with rainfall exceeding 1 inch in Bridgeport, and you could see a lot of the peaks have been all within the past 10 to 15 years. Another thing that we're seeing is that tropical storms tend to stay around longer. What appears to be happening is that the forward speed is slowing down, allowing the storms to hang around longer, and the longer they hang around, the more rainfall that they drop. And that, I won't go through the whole thing, but this table is in our report and identifies some of the more recent events too, along with their speed. But you can see as speed decreases, the precipitation has been increasing. And overall, New England is trending wetter. You can see actually, this is, there's, obviously forecasts are, all over the place, but in average, we're looking at 13% increase in rainfall here in New England by mid-century. So another thing that's happened since the drainage infrastructure was installed or modified, and now is that the drainage criteria has changed. When I first started in 1994, we had used data from the 1961 technical paper number 40 by the National Weather Service. And there, the 24-hour storm duration for this area, right, 50-year would give you 6.5 inches, and 100-year would be 7.32 inches. That was updated in 2014 based upon the 50-plus years of additional record that was available at that point. 2015. So NOAA came out with its Atlas 14. A 24-hour storm duration actually is, for a 50-year event, is now 7.4 inches, and the 100-year is 8.32. So basically, the old 100-year storm is now the current 50-year storm, just to show you how things have changed. So some of our study recommendations. And as I go through these, I just want to make sure that we understand the difference between some of the terminology I use. I tend to talk in a lot of technical speak, but when I talk about concrete pipe, what I mean is reinforced concrete pipe. It's your traditional round pipe, what do you think of as pipe? It's readily available, easy to install, and it's a lower cost. You also hear me talk about concrete box culverts. And as you would think, the concrete box culvert is rectangular. It's the shape of a box. Those have a longer lead time. It takes longer to get them. They're more challenging to install just because they're bigger. They have to be winched together. But because it's not round, right, it provides some additional capacity for the same height. You can get more flow through those. Again, a little bit more about reinforced concrete pipe. This is the round pipe, a rounded cross section, and it's it's easier to get. You also heard me talk about elliptical pipe. Some people also call this squash pipe. So it's an elliptical cross section where it's basically round, but it has a wider span than it does a rise going up and down. And this is often used in areas where there are utility conflicts, if you have to get over or under a certain utility, and also where you have limited cover, right? Because pipes require a certain amount of earth or cover on top of them to avoid damage. So sometimes these are used in those situations, and those are a little harder to obtain than the reinforced concrete pipes. So alternate one that we looked at was removing the pipe connection between the two segments of open channel immediately south of the railroad, and then installing a new 38-inch by 60-inch pipe. So that's elliptical, the oval cross-section, coming down Squab Lane, down Day Street, taking a quick jog down the Post Road, working through the Darien Thrift Shop property, and then working its way out toward the Goodwives River. And what that was, right, we're looking at a 50-year design event, 2% annual probability, 7.4 inches of rainfall. And what we're showing is in the lot, it goes from 27 inches under existing conditions to 18 under proposed. And down at near Grove Street, it goes from 16 to 2 inches. So that's a pretty significant improvement, but 18 is not great. So then we looked at alternate 2. This one, again, these are all a 50-year design, which is a town standard. It's at 7.4 inches. What we did look at was, again, removing the pipe. Instead of running it all the way down to the Goodwives River, we looked at running it to the Post Road to meet the existing drainage main line. And that, actually the results were worse here, which we kind of expected, right? Where this was only reduced by 3 inches, and here we got about an 11-inch reduction. Alternate 3, what we looked at here was having the lot itself continue to drain using the existing storm drainage infrastructure, but the outlet from Tilly Pond would be routed to the east, and that's not good. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're back. All right, so let me go back when we're at alternate 3. All right. Okay, so, and then basically route down, again, a 38 by 60 elliptical pipe, routed down Day Street, connecting to the existing storm drainage infrastructure in Boston Post Road. We definitely get some improvement here, down to 8.5 inches, but absolutely nothing up here at the top of Brook Street. So alternate 4, what we looked at was very similar, but dividing the runoff from the lot into 2 down both pipes. The western half of the lot would run down the existing drainage infrastructure, whereas the eastern half would utilize the new pipe. And again, same pipe size, 38 by 60. You can see, we got a pretty hefty reduction here, but not so much here. So let us to believe, that there's something else that needs to be done in this area. But splitting the flow using a second pipe, that certainly has some benefits at the top of the study area. So alternate 5, what we looked at was removing that pipe that connects the 2 sections of open channel, and then piping that open channel to a new drain, to that new drainage line that connects on a post road. So that made things a little bit worse up here, and there really wasn't much of a change here. So alternate 6, what we did was, again, we split the lot, whereas, just to go back, alternate 5, we did not split the lot. We assumed that all the lot would go into the existing system. This is a clarification. So alternate 6, we do split the flow from the lot to the old existing pipe and to the new, and again, not much change there. Alternate 7, what we did here was basically build on alternate 6, but we did also improve the piping in Grove Street to be, in Brook Street to be a 2x6, 2 feet high, 6 foot wide box culvert. And again, some improvement, you know, we're not doing as well up here, but there's definitely some improvement there. And then alternate 8 is where we finally landed, which includes splitting the lot, new drainage pipe, 38 by 60, makes its way all the way down to the Goodwives River, which is basically similar to alternate 1. Removing the pipe that connects the 2 sections of open channel, piping that open channel into the new drainage system, and improving the pipe on Brook Street. And then we're also removing this pipe up here. Right, so we've got 2 fully independent systems when you're up at the lot. So what we did was we compared the different alternatives, 1 through 6, as well as the existing. You can see here the depths and the West Avenue lot. These are the depths at Grove and Brook. And you can see that option 8 is the best of these, offering the most flood relief. But unfortunately, it's also the most expensive. But, you know, for 10% more, plus or minus, you're getting a lot more benefit over option 7. So a little bit more about why we chose alternate 8. It exceeds or meets the town's drainage standard. It also provides a factor of safety for the future. It's a significant improvement in roadway flood depth over the 25-year and the 50-year flood events. Flooding is eliminated in the public right-of-way for a 50-year storm. It's also reduced on private property. Not eliminated, but you know, it's certainly made better. One thing to keep in mind, that if constructed, the improvements won't solve flooding forever. Right? There's always going to be, you know, potential for a bigger, badder storm event to roll through, but the improvements will reduce the severity and the frequency of flooding, promoting resilience in the area. So why not even larger pipes, right? If going from a 2x5 box culvert to a 2x6 gets you more flow, why not go even bigger? Well, there's some reasons why you can't do that or shouldn't do that. First of all, pipes require a minimum amount of soil above them, right? Because you have traffic loading, you have trucks driving over them, right? So you can't go up. Your only direction to go is down. And if you keep going down, you're not going to be able to meet your slope to get to the outfall, or you might even be lower than the Goodwives River. And then you're looking at a pump situation, which nobody wants. The bottom elevation, like I said, will get deeper. It also increases the potential for utility conflicts. A lot of these are tight, constrained corridors. So that's why we try to mimic some of the existing pipe sizes out there, but with different shapes. That's why we might, you know, if we have a 24-inch pipe, we might go with a box culvert that's 2 feet high, but a little bit wider. And like I said, you also need to meet the elevation at the outlet. And this following graphic kind of shows you an example of what, you know, could potentially happen. You have your existing storm drainage pipe here in blue. For example, you have sanitary sewers from each of these buildings on the other side that go to the main and the roadway. Now, if you put a larger pipe in there, right, you can't go up, right? Assume you probably have minimum cover here. So what happens with a larger storm drainage pipe, you have a conflict, right? So not only are you replacing the pipe, you're also replacing the laterals, but what might also happen is, you know, the elevations might be such that you can't get under the pipe to your sanitary sewer main. So there's a lot of utility conflict investigation that needs to happen. One of the questions that we had when we had one of our preliminary meetings with the stakeholders was a question about how Bailey Avenue connects into the system. And what you see here is, again, north is to the top here. Here's Tilly Pond, Squab Lane, Grove Street, Brook Street. But what you can see here is on Leroy, there's drainage that does come from the eastern end of Bailey Avenue. It connects to Leroy, and then it goes through the lot, and then beneath the railroad right-of-way, and then down Brook Street. And that was accounted for in our model. You can see it here as this blue watershed area, and that in Bailey is up in here. So we did account for that in our model. Another question is, what's required to get the flooding to zero? And what's required is basically following what we had in alternate 8, but using much larger pipe sizes, particularly the pipe beneath the railroad that jumps up from a 2x6 to, I think, a 3x5, but more significantly coming down here, instead of the 2x6 box, that needs to be a 3x7, which is a much larger pipe, and we think there'll be all sorts of utility issues with that. But in the 50-year event, that does get the flooding to zero at both the coming out of the lot here, as well as at Grove and Brook Street. Another thing that we looked at is, can changes be made to Tilly Pond so you can get more storage in there? And we did look at that. You know, this graphic kind of shows you, how flood storage works. You have an outlet here. Anything beneath that is dead storage, right? It's already full at the time of the storm. So what you're really relying on is this area here, which is the live storage, the area above your lowest outfall, which is where, which is empty at the start of the storm. It can build up and then slowly be released, whereas the dead storage area is always going to remain in the pond. So we looked at dredging. The problem with dredging is it could help with water quality, but in terms of flood control, dredging happens down here. So it creates more dead storage, more water volume below the outlet. So at the start of the storm, that volume's already full. So it really doesn't help with flood attenuation or flood storage. We already talked about dead storage. And another thing that we looked at is, this is a picture taken from Google Street View here, right? We looked at, well, can you raise the berms? Yeah, you can raise the berms to create more storage, but as you can imagine, it would negatively impact the aesthetics of the park. Right, you've already got a berm here, so if you can imagine, there's a couple other issues here, because if you raise the berm, it becomes regulated as a dam, meaning any trees on or near the crest would need to come down, because in the event of a storm, if something falls, right, you have more water stored behind here, tree falls, the dam goes, and then you have a bigger flooding problem than you would otherwise. And then we did look at, well, how much would you really need to raise them? If it's 6 inches, that's one thing. But we looked at, it was about 6 to 7 feet. So you can imagine, got your nice pond here, nice park, adding another 6 to 7 feet up in here. I think you'd have some people that'd be pretty unhappy, completely, essentially wall off the pond to visitors. So that's why we didn't explore that one any further. So, like anything else, there are permitting requirements, and I'll just give you a quick overview of what those are. This is for alternate 8. Because we're doing work at the Goodwives River outfall, that would require approval of the Environmental Protection Commission here in town. Not so bad. But we're also doing work in the state right-of-way. All right, both Boston Post Road, that's a state highway, as well as the railroad. Those are both owned by DOT, so we'd have to go through them for an encroachment permit. So the level of pain is taken up a few notches. And then for the ultimate in pain is working with Metro North. It's a very rigorous process, very intensive. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It just takes some time to get through the process. So that's what we're looking at for permits. And then next steps. Right? So if this were to proceed to through design and construction, what we anticipate is about 3 months for a detailed survey, 6 months for a semi-final design, enough for permitting level discussions, 9 to 15 months to work your way through the permitting process. And then we also have to get easements, right? We're proposing some work on private property. That could take a while to get through those negotiations. Final design, a lot of that can happen concurrent with the other two, but you need the results of the easements and the permitting to finalize your design. That'll be about 3 months. About another 2 months for bidding and award. And then construction, probably be about 12 months. So, all said and done, we're probably 42, 43, 45, months out. So it's a long process. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. And I think the requirement was that you go to the microphone, right? Okay, correct. All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm David Martin from 15 Libby Lane. Could you just show the chart that compares all the different alternatives?
Sure.
I was kind of interested in alternative 1 relative to alternative 8 because it looks like you didn't price it out, and maybe my eyesight wasn't very good, but I thought that the efficacy of alternative 1 was pretty darn close to alternative 8. No, it was not. Never mind. On the depth at the West Avenue area, it's completely. It's significantly worse on the west. On the Grove Street side, it was pretty close at 2 inches, which is probably a manageable amount, but the 18 inches probably not.
Yeah, that's
never mind.
way
Thanks.
too much. Thank you.
No one's going to say something. Do you want me to use this mic?
Yes.
Hi, David Genovese, 15 Baywater Drive, and a stakeholder downtown involved in a number of different properties in this area. Just for the record, and Joe, you know this, but I just wanted to make sure that the public is aware that, as we've worked to develop different properties over time over the last 20 years, and it really started with Penny Glassmeyer at Grove Street, we've always taken steps working with engineers in the town to upgrade the infrastructure on our properties. The drainage infrastructure. And when we built 1020 Boston Post Road in 2007 and 8, we were not required to by the town, but we identified a problem. I think you might have been there around it, but you weren't working with us at the time.
I was aware of it.
We discovered a problem with the drainage system, the pipe from the Post Road to what was the open water course behind 1020 Post Road. So that was in a DOT easement. We worked with the DOT to replace the pipe that was pretty decrepit, was pitched the wrong way, was broken. It was an old corrugated metal pipe that had really fallen into a bad state of disrepair. We upsized it, and we basically paid for the pipe. Well, we paid for the labor in the pipe. I think the town was, the state was supposed to reimburse us for the cost of the material, but they never did. We're still waiting for the payment 20 years later, roughly. But then when we did Corbin Drive, we organized a major upsize in the drainage system, and we buried that open water course or drainage system that ran from behind 1020 Post almost to Old Kings Highway south. But, the flooding has continued in and around Brook Street, and and I think the studies showed that area couldn't handle much more than a 2-year storm. And it really, as someone who's, with my team and my partners making significant investments in downtown, and I hope you would agree, always trying to do the right thing for us and the town and the residents, it's hard because this infrastructure, the way that it all works is a function of how each piece is sized or maintained. And the town's doing the best it can to maintain what's there. But some of these pipes are just clearly insufficient for the needs today. So, we've offered to help and to contribute toward the cost of the work. we've already paid for the work that we did on our property and nearby our property. But this is really important because, we think that people want a vibrant downtown with great shops and restaurants and stores and, healthy, living environments. But the reality of it is, if we don't take care of this eventually, as a group, we're going to have problems keeping these buildings well occupied. Westport's Main Street, as you may know, Westport's Main Street has had a lot of flooding over the last years, increased flooding, to the point where the property owners have had to build flood walls to protect their properties during storms because the drainage systems just aren't working. So we're in the process of helping the Glassmeyers do that on a property right now on Brook Street. But it's really important work. We want to offer our help and, help with the state, help with the other private property owners. And, we've even, I think expressed to you that we're comfortable, even talking about if we need to put some of this infrastructure on our own properties, we can explore that and we're open to it. So we want to be good partners in solving the problem. We can't do it alone. All that said, I do think, it's fair for us to have an expectation that basic infrastructure around our properties and owned by the town and the state will be adequately sized and adequately maintained. I know Darren and Ed's team are doing the best they can to maintain it. Maintenance isn't the problem. It's just these things were sized a long time ago when the world just looked a lot different than it does today because of storm events and the development around. So anyway, I want to thank you for your good work, and I want to thank the town, the Board of Selectmen, Monica and John, who are here, and others, David, for really stepping up and adding this to the list of things to study. We know you have a lot of, calls for study and work. We really want to work with you to make sure that this isn't a study that just gets prepared and sits on the shelf like many before it, here and elsewhere. So thanks again for your efforts and for, doing this good work. It's really, really important to all of us.
Thank you.
My name is Kip Coons. I'm from 75 Maywood Road. I'm one of the owners of the parking lot that you talked about. I'd like to hear an assessment of working with Metro North, because it sounds to me between ConnDOT and Metro North, it's almost like the wall that can't be broken.
Well, it can be broken. You have to be persistent and use a lot of force to do it. My dealings, I've dealt with ConnDOT much more regularly than I have the railroad. I had a deal with both agencies on a project in Wilton. I don't know if you're familiar with the pedestrian walkway there, but that involved a railroad crossing, work on the DOT right away, and identifying the right people was a challenge on who to talk to. But once you did that, they were fairly responsive. I don't want to say they returned my calls immediately. It took maybe 2 or 3 times, but eventually I would get an answer. So I would say it's not impossible. It's just it'll take a lot of effort and the collective effort of the town and the stakeholders like yourself to really push it through. I don't see it being insurmountable. I'm just seeing it taking a while.
Could you just bring up the Gantt chart again and maybe just talk through kind of where you see the variations in time it would take? Just because some of those sections seem super aggressive, I thought, as far as timing. It just
Right. Agreed. I think the biggest unknown here is the permitting piece, right? And this is based on my experience in Wilton. Again, it's definitely a smaller project. That was more on the 10-month time frame of getting it through, and obviously the local wetland agency wasn't a problem getting approval. It was really, trying to get the attention of CONDOT and more specifically the railroad, to get both of them on the same page. Because what we had, they were at one point telling us conflicting information. So we had to have a meeting to resolve that. But, a lot of it also depends on who your reviewer is, unfortunately, right? I think that is your biggest issue right here. That, is the permitting. The semifinal design, right? We have a route picked out. I think, I'm confident about that. Easements, depends on where we go. We could, maybe make some strategic decisions on the pipe routing to, so we don't need to acquire as many easements. But that's probably about right. The final design, I have it here at the end of easement procurement. This is the development of your construction documents, your bidding documents. In reality, what we probably would do is we probably start it here, but we really wouldn't be able to finalize it until your easements are done. This by far, I think, is the biggest unknown. And to the extent that, again, using our collective efforts to push the agencies, with, combination of stakeholder and local political power, I think that would certainly help contract that. But unfortunately, the permitting, it's just, it's just a, big variable. Oh, sure.
And I am Shed Glassmeyer of 8 Woods End Road. I didn't mention that. What about precedents as far as, making new crossings through the railroads, that sort of thing? Not crossings, but boring holes, what have you. Are you familiar with areas that have had success with that?
You mean boring the hole under the railroad?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, we wouldn't do that. There are specialty firms that, do that sort of work, that, design that. But are you talking about like the design or the actual process of doing that?
Just how often it's happened on Metro North?
I can't tell you how often that's happened. I know we did, not us, we worked with, on a project in Westport that did some boring. It was beneath 95 and not the railroad, though. I'd have to look into that. I unfortunately don't have a frame of reference for you, but I can ask around and find out.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Rolf Oben. I live at 9 Archer Lane. I'm also a member of the Public Works Committee at RTM. I have essentially one question relating to the scope of the project and the timeline. At this point, if you start to move ahead and you get into, let's say, the semifinal design phase, will that then give enough information for you to shore up the almost 3.5 million version 8 budget estimate?
Right, yeah, what that would do, as we proceed through the design phase, right, we have more certainty, right? We know, what our limits of paving will be. We know what utilities need to be moved, right? We have a much clearer picture. Right now, this is all conceptual, so, it's a very high-level estimate, with a very large contingency tacked on it. So as we start to refine, our quantities, more design unknowns become known, that contingency shrinks, and you, start to hone in on a number.
So by the end of the semifinal design phase, would you be more, what would you estimate your confidence level being in the $3.5 million estimate?
I would say, at the end of the semifinal design, we're probably 75 to 80% sure. We're
75 to 80% sure.
Yeah,
okay.
within a band.
I won't hold you to it.
Okay, no, I appreciate it.
So Ed, right now we have reserved in the ARPA fund $250,000 for design. Would that bring us to that level of the semifinal design and his guesstimate of 75 to 80% surety?
250,000 get us into the semifinal.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I gauged that price based on what our consultant fees were for salt box to get us through the entire process to get us all the way to bid documents. The only thing I could warn you, and I know I'm going to, Jim Cameron's going to.
Yeah, he's going to be upset.
Yeah.
Yeah, use the podium.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So where I based that 250 on was the salt box project, generally the same scope. There are some nuances with regards to boring under Metro North. Downtown work is a little bit more difficult. We're both dealing with the DOT crossing the post road on both projects, so I kind of gauged it that way. But I warn you not to hang on the semi-final design with permitting and easements still in front of you before you start working on a price. And the reason that Joe and I work so closely together on a lot of projects is as we get to the final design phase, we're always asking for opinion of cost at that part, because we've done all of our homework at that time. We've gotten prices to core and bore underneath Metro North. We've done our homework on the availability for concrete products. All of those things have been done at that phase, not a year and a half before. So please, I be very careful when you look at that number.
Okay, so you're saying that to really shore up those numbers more firmly, you'd have to begin to the permitting phase?
I got to think that we'd want to be into that phase, if not close to the end of it.
Okay.
And I think Joe had mentioned also that the easements and permitting, you could almost do those simultaneously, but we do like to push it out a little bit further, just in case something does come up along the permitting phase that requires you to make a change.
All right. I'm sorry to, probe so much, but there is an interest by numerous parties and commissions in the town about the cost of all the various projects that are before us. Mm-hmm. Salt box being certainly one, this being one, and I think there's a desire to know when we could, as a town, make a vote and a decision to go forward with the funding on these projects. So I'm just trying to get a feel for when you're going to have confidence to know the number so that we can make it a vote on going forward, and when that might be. So it appears to me it's going to be quite a ways out still before we're going to get to that design, that decision
I
time.
think for both projects, for Saltbox and for this one here, yes.
Okay.
I think it behooves us to do our homework
right
before we put numbers out there. Now, Joe has provided us a cost estimate for
right.
that alternative 8. It does have 2 heavy contingencies in there. I understand why he did that, and I agree with him. But those numbers, as he said, will shrink as we go through the design phase and get ourselves closer and closer to final design.
All right. Thank you.
Mark Adelette, 69 Holly Lane, also a member of the Public Works Committee of the RTM. Joe, thank you very much. Great presentation. I have a basic question. One of the ideas you passed on one of the slides was increasing the capacity of Tilly Pond by increasing the elevation of the, I think you called it the berm. Is increasing the footprint something that's environmentally possible and from a space standpoint possible? And
from increasing the footprint, I think you're probably pretty constrained. I'd have to take a closer look at that. But it is more of a permitting challenge too, because the state's water diversion statute requires that you get a diversion permit if you're enlarging the waters of the state, which is what Tilly Pond is. We recently proposed an idea of reshaping a pond in Trumbull, kind of, somewhat similar situation, and we were told flat out that it was not permittable. So the state's very averse to changing shapes of ponds and shorelines. But we could do a little more research on, first of all, is it possible? We could certainly take a look at that.
Thank you. And I guess related to that, some of those earlier photographs, if I recall correctly, showed no Tilly Pond, and then it.
Points in time.
Right.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if there's a distinction between a pond that was created versus a pond that was naturally forming. I don't know, I'm way out over my skis here, but just asking the question.
Yeah, understood, yeah. If there's a distinction between something that's naturally occurring or man-made, like Tilly Pond, and I would say no. The state, looks at it as waters of the state, which, same thing in my Trumbull situation, that was impounded by a dam, so it was man-made there, so. So based on my experience, I think it'll be a tough road. I don't want to say it's impossible, but we were told flat out this is not permittable. But that's not to say if you push it a little bit harder. But I think you'd be challenged to find enough footprint to expand it without encroaching on some of those nice green spaces.
Thank you.
Sure. All right.
Anybody else? If there's no other questions, thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you, Joe, for your presentation.
Thank you.